We're about to step into one of the messiest mafia dramas imaginable. Claire Esposito is dangerous in the one way Vito Caruso never learned how to handle. He runs half the New York underworld, terrifies grown men with a look, and yet one smirk from her can strip away every bit of control he has left. He warns her that she's playing with fire, and she dares him to burn her. Vito has always lived by two rules: never touch your partner's family, and never lose your composure. Claire is his best friend's sister, which should make her completely off limits, but the moment she gets close, the rules he built his life around start to crack. He kisses her like he already knows there's no going back. Some lines are easy to respect until the one person you want most is standing right in front of you. Claire knew exactly what she was doing to him, but it was not only about teasing a dangerous man. People whispered Vito's name in dark alleys like he was the monster under the bed, afraid of his guns, his silence, and that cold voice of his. But around Claire, there was something human in him that no one else ever saw. His eyes softened for half a second before he remembered who he was. At 24, Claire had learned to read rooms full of killers, and Vito was the only man in them who looked at her like she was both trouble and relief. It all started on a Friday night, inside the packed Caruso mansion, where every powerful mob figure in the city had gathered for a family meeting. Claire didn't walk into that room looking for peace. She walked in knowing Vito would see her. Bernardo had no idea what was happening. He was locked in the main room with Vito, talking business, while Claire moved through the party with a glass of red wine and a black dress that made subtlety impossible. Her 17-year-old sister, Rebecca, was leaning against the wall, completely distracted by Gail Caruso. Claire nudged her and told her to stop staring, teasing her about the cartoon hearts practically floating over her head. Rebecca went bright red and denied everything, but her eyes stayed glued to the 19-year-old mob prince. Then she snapped back that Claire had no right to judge anyone for staring. Claire tried to play innocent, but the heat in her cheeks gave her away. Rebecca noticed. Of course. Rebecca noticed everything. Rebecca used that sharp little tone she had clearly stolen from Claire, pointing out that Vito nearly broke his neck every time Claire walked past him. Before Claire could defend herself, the heavy doors opened. The mafia bosses spilled out with the smell of expensive whiskey and Cuban cigars trailing behind them. Bernardo came out first, grinning and completely unaware that his sister was becoming a serious problem for his best friend. He told the girls to go eat while they finished their business. Right behind him came Vito. The look he gave Claire made her stomach tighten. Not from fear exactly, but from knowing he was done pretending not to notice her. Then Vito said her name. Esposito. His voice was low, controlled, and dangerous enough to make the room feel smaller. His eyes moved over her black dress, and Claire stepped straight into his space, like she had been waiting for him to challenge her, down the hall. Bernardo laughed, completely clueless. Vito leaned closer, skipped every polite word, and murmured, "Library, 5 minutes." Then he walked away, leaving her with a racing heart and the scent of his cologne in the air. Claire knew she should turn around, find Rebecca, and behave like someone with sense. Instead, she waited exactly 3 minutes before slipping away. This is where everything starts to unravel. Claire pushed open the heavy library door and found Vito waiting inside, looking torn between fury and something he was trying hard not to show. He tried to be the reasonable one, telling her how reckless this was, but she cut him off immediately. "You called me here," she reminded him. Vito closed the space between them, no longer hiding how badly she had shaken him, and asked if she had any idea what she did to him. Claire could have answered with a joke. For once, she didn't. She only looked at him and told him to stop talking. That was all it took. Vito snapped. In 2 strides, he was on her, kissing her with no patience and no caution left. His hands held her face like he had been fighting this for too long, and Claire met him with the same urgency. When they broke apart to breathe, panic flickered through him. She was Bernardo's sister. This was a death sentence in their world. Claire saw the guilt cross his face and pulled him back before he could retreat behind it. Vito gave up the fight for that moment. He pressed her against the heavy door, and the whole thing turned reckless fast. She whispered that someone might catch them, but even she could hear how little she cared. They both knew this had been waiting to happen, even if neither of them had been brave enough to name it. Vito smiled against her neck, and for a few seconds, the danger felt far away. Then voices echoed down the hall. Not just any voices. Bernardo's. Her own brother was walking straight toward the library. Panic hit Vito's face instantly. He went from desperate man to strategist in one breath. Scanning the room like it had turned into a battlefield, he pointed her toward a hidden side door leading into an office she had never noticed. "Go," he ordered. Claire ran for it, disappearing through the secret exit just as the main brass handle began to turn. Claire slipped out through the side door a heartbeat before Bernardo walked into the library. She pressed herself against the hallway wall, trying to remember how to breathe. When she finally returned to the party, her cheeks were flushed and her lips were swollen. Rebecca took one look at her and knew exactly what had happened. The rest of the night blurred around Claire. Vito acted composed. But every time their eyes met, the tension hit hard enough to steal the air. Eventually, the party thinned out, and Florence told Claire it was time to leave because Bernardo was staying behind to finish business with Vito. Claire nodded like she had not almost been caught in the most dangerous secret of her life. Claire followed her family out. But just before leaving, she looked back. Vito stood in the hallway, looking completely undone beneath the calm face he showed everyone else. His eyes carried desire, guilt and fear all at once, like he already understood what they had set in motion. On the ride home, Rebecca kept talking, but Claire barely heard her. She was still thinking about Vito's cologne and the way he had held her like something dangerous and precious. Past midnight, she reached her room and found 2 messages from him. The first said it could never happen again. The second admitted that was a lie, because he wanted it constantly. Claire smiled and texted back, "Stop fighting it." Vito replied that her brother would kill him. She answered, "Only if he finds out." Claire lay awake, caught between euphoria and terror. By Sunday, she was back at the Caruso mansion for a huge family lunch. She spent the morning choosing her outfit, finally settling on a light blue dress she knew would catch Vito's eye without looking like she had tried too hard. Then she spent 20 minutes making her messy bun look effortless. The backyard was crowded, full of barbecue smoke and whispered mob business. Bernardo held tense conversations by the pool, while Vito carried platters of food with his sleeves rolled up, listening to every word even when he seemed relaxed. Claire stared a little too long. Rebecca had to nudge her hard before anyone noticed, then dragged her away to meet some friends. Claire laughed it off, but her eyes still found Vito across the yard. Rebecca pulled Claire away, but Claire kept losing track of the conversation whenever Vito moved nearby. He looked calm to everyone else, but Claire saw the strain in his jaw. An hour later, the perfect chance appeared. Everyone was distracted, so Claire slipped into the kitchen for ice. Suddenly a hand caught her wrist and pulled her into the dark pantry. She whispered that he was insane, but she didn't fight him. Vito pinned her against the shelves, admitted he probably was, and kissed her breathless. The whole family was just outside, which should have scared them both. Instead, the danger made every second sharper, then, just as fast. He pulled back and told her this was how people got killed in their world. Claire realized Vito was not only fighting desire, he was fighting years of discipline, loyalty, and fear of betraying the one man who trusted him completely. Before she could answer, Florence's voice sounded nearby. Vito reacted instantly, pushing Claire out of the pantry a second before her mother walked in. Florence, completely unaware, helped her find the ice. Claire managed a normal thank you while her heart hammered in her chest. A few seconds later, Vito stepped out holding napkins, calm as ever. The look he and Claire shared was full of everything they couldn't say. The rest of lunch was torture, all careful silence and stolen glances. Bernardo noticed nothing, but Rebecca's knowing smile said she saw plenty. When it was time to leave, Vito shook Claire's hand in front of the family. It looked formal, almost cold, but his thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, and the tiny touch sent heat down her spine. He said goodbye out loud, while his eyes said something far more dangerous. Claire answered casually, pretending she wasn't burning alive. In the car, Rebecca finally leaned close and whispered that they were terrible at hiding it. Claire tried to act confused, but Rebecca begged her to be careful. Bernardo's code would destroy them if he found out. Claire stared out the window and admitted she knew. They were breaking rules that mattered in their world. and the fallout could be deadly. But by then, regret already felt impossible. After the way Vito kissed her, Claire knew he was just as far gone. Then came the next problem. They were headed to an off-grid mob safe house outside New York, a place Claire had never been before. Bernardo, overprotective as always, had ordered her to pack a bag because trouble with the Russo network was heating up again. The Russos had lost territory, money, and several shipping routes after Vito cut through their operations. And everyone knew Dante Russo wanted leverage. With the family scattered, Bernardo wanted Claire under his roof, where he and Vito could keep watch. No arguments, so Claire sat in the back of an armored SUV, with Vito driving and Bernardo in the passenger seat. Every time her eyes met Vito's in the rearview mirror, the silence became harder to survive. The safe house was more fortress than home, wired with cameras and guarded by armed men. Vito parked in the bunker, and Bernardo jumped out, already focused on his all-night meetings. Inside, Vito told Claire her room was upstairs. His voice was painfully professional, which was almost laughable after their late-night messages. He ordered her to stay hidden. She gave him a dry yes, sir, and his jaw tightened before he turned away to join her brother. Upstairs, her room was sleek and quiet, with a huge bed facing the dark woods. Claire dropped onto the mattress, listening to muffled voices downstairs as men planned violent things she knew better than to ask about. By 11, she showered and changed into pajamas. Claire was staying in a house full of mobsters, and her choice of sleepwear was a pink silk tank top with short shorts. She tried to convince herself she wasn't trying to tempt anyone, but even she knew that was a lie. Still, her mind was not only on Vito. She kept thinking about the Russo name, the locked gates, and the way Bernardo had gone pale when a guard mentioned Dante's people moving through Rome. The house finally went quiet, except for a few low voices downstairs. A sensible person would have locked the door and gone to sleep. Claire was not feeling sensible. Barefoot, she slipped down the dim hallway without making a sound, heading straight for the last door on the left, Vito's room. Her heart hammered as she stood in front of it and knocked. 10 seconds later, the door opened. Vito stood there with his dress shirt half unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up, looking like he had not slept in days. He said her name like it was both a warning and an invitation. Claire tried to act harmless, claiming she only came to say goodnight since they were under the same roof. Vito didn't believe her for a second. He checked the hallway to make sure no one was watching, then pulled her inside so fast she almost stumbled. The door clicked shut. For the first time since all of this began, they were truly alone. And for the first time, Claire saw how tired he was from wanting something he believed he should never touch. He told her she was playing with fire, but he was already moving closer. He reminded her that her brother, his boss, was downstairs with 6 armed men. Anyone could come up. Claire didn't care. She backed against the wall, fearless now, and told him he only kept pushing her away because he was weak for her. He was close enough for her to see the gold in his eyes. She traced his jaw, knowing exactly what it did to him. He kissed the inside of her hand like he had already surrendered. Then he asked what she wanted. Claire gave him the truth. She wanted all of him. No more messages that said one thing and looks that said another. Those words broke the last of his restraint. Vito kissed her hard, with nothing careful left in him. It was urgent, almost desperate, like he had been starving for this, longer than either of them wanted to admit. Claire matched him, pulling at his shirt and dragging him closer. He murmured that they needed to move to the bed, and she let him guide her back until her legs hit the mattress. They fell together, finally giving in to everything they had spent months holding back. His hands moved over her waist and ribs as he kissed her neck. And for a while, neither of them cared what waited outside that room. Claire began unbuttoning his shirt, feeling the hard muscle beneath her hands. Vito whispered her name and asked if she was sure. Once they crossed this line, there would be no pretending. They could return to what they were before. Claire looked into his vulnerable eyes and gave him her answer. That was when the worst possible sound hit them. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Bernardo, her brother, the boss. Vito nearly launched himself off the bed, cursing under his breath as he took in her messy clothes. Claire jumped up, fixing her silk pajamas with shaking hands, whispering that she was hiding in the bathroom. She slipped into the bathroom and shut the door without making a sound. Her heart was pounding so hard, She was sure the whole house could hear it. Outside, Bernardo knocked sharply and asked Vito if he had seen his sister. Vito sat there and lied through his teeth, saying he hadn't seen her at all. Bernardo did not leave right away. He asked why Vito sounded breathless. Vito answered that he had been checking the perimeter cameras, and the silence that followed felt longer than any gunfight. The footsteps finally faded, but Claire waited 3 full minutes before opening the bathroom door. Vito sat there looking like the floor had dropped out from under him. He muttered that this couldn't happen, that it would ruin his friendship with Bernardo, but there was no conviction in his voice. Claire knelt in front of him and forced him to look at her. "It's already happening," she said. Vito whispered that Bernardo was getting suspicious. The truth was, they could not hide something this intense forever. Claire said they would be more careful, which sounded ridiculous after they had almost been caught minutes earlier. Vito only cupped her face and looked at her like a man trying to memorize something he was afraid to lose. Vito admitted defeat. He told her he couldn't stay away, that he had tried, but she tore through every bit of logic he had. Claire covered his hands with hers and told him to stop fighting. They were already past the point of no return. Then they kissed again, hard and full of everything they were afraid to say. When they pulled apart, Claire knew she had to leave before Bernardo came back. Vito told her to go, but his fingers lingered like he hated the order. At the door she turned for one last look. He stood there, caught between guilt and longing. They whispered goodnight, calling each other Caruso and Esposito, like the names themselves were another secret. She ran barefoot back to her room and shut the door just as Bernardo's steps returned upstairs. Claire dove into bed and pretended to sleep right before Bernardo opened her door. She played it perfectly, rubbing her eyes and asking what was wrong. Bernardo claimed he was only checking on her, but his eyes moved around the room like he expected to find proof. He knew something was off. After a long pause, he shook his head and left. Claire fell back against the pillows, heart flipping in her chest. Her phone lit up with a message from Vito. That was too close. Then another. "I'm completely screwed because I don't even care anymore." He knew he would regret this, but right then he only wanted her. Claire smiled at the screen, still buzzing with adrenaline. Tomorrow could deal with itself. When Claire put her phone away, the truth settled over her. They were in trouble, because Bernardo had already started connecting pieces. It was only a matter of time before everything exploded. Still lying there, she couldn't make herself care. The next week was torture. Vito avoided her like she was a loaded gun, acting as if she didn't exist, but she still caught him looking when he thought nobody saw. His distance hurt more than she expected, because it proved he was scared too. On Tuesday night, Bernardo asked Claire to deliver some documents to the Caruso mansion while he was stuck in a meeting. It felt like the opening she had been waiting for. She put on dark jeans and a simple white blouse, ready to face whatever was happening between them. She didn't bother with a dramatic outfit. By then she knew she didn't need a short dress to make Vito Caruso lose his mind. The mansion was quiet that night. She found him hunched over his huge desk, looking exhausted. Claire held up the envelope and said her brother had sent it. Vito shut down instantly. He told her to drop it off, like she was nothing more than a messenger. But Claire didn't leave. She stepped inside and locked the door. The click made his shoulders freeze. He warned her to stop without even looking up. Claire walked slowly toward the desk and told him she was only delivering papers. He was the one acting like there was something else in the room. Vito's head snapped up. The raw intensity in his eyes almost knocked the breath out of her. He growled that she knew exactly what happened whenever they were alone. Claire placed the envelope on the desk and leaned against it. He looked worn down, his jaw tight, every muscle fighting for control. She asked softly why he was trying so hard to resist. He went defensive at once, hands clenching into fists. Claire leaned closer, pushing into his space. She called his bluff. All his excuses were about Mafia code, family rules, and Bernardo. Not one of them was about how he actually felt. Vito lost control. He stood so fast his leather chair nearly tipped over, then rounded the desk until he was towering over her. He was furious, but not at Claire. He asked if she really wanted to know what he felt, and then the truth came pouring out. He was losing his mind. He couldn't think straight around her. He saw her every time he closed his eyes. Claire stayed quiet and let him say it, because she had waited too long to hear the truth from him. Vito's voice broke as he admitted he felt like a traitor to his best friend for even looking at her. He was breaking the same rules that had kept him alive. And even knowing it could destroy everything, he couldn't stop. Claire looked at him and whispered the one thing that could undo him. "Don't stop." She reached up and touched the stubble along his jaw. Vito warned her bitterly that Bernardo would demand they end this when he found out. And he would find out. Because Vito couldn't hide what he felt anymore, Claire took a breath and said it first. She told him she loved him. Vito closed his eyes like the words hurt. He begged her not to make it harder. But Claire held his face in both hands and said it again. She loved him, reckless and terrified as it was. Finally, Vito broke. The cold enforcer disappeared, and he admitted that he knew. Vito gave in. He told her he loved her so much it hurt. He spent nights awake, trying to figure out how to protect her from his world. And from himself. Then he kissed her. And the kiss carried every confession he had been too afraid to speak. He lifted her onto the desk. When they came up for air, he tried to return to reason, saying it changed nothing, because he still had to respect her brother. Claire told him to take whatever part of her he could have. Vito groaned and kissed her again. They were lost in each other until voices in the hallway shattered the moment. Vito fixed his shirt, hating that he had to send her away. Their secret had stopped being a game. It had become real. Claire nodded, reached for the door, then turned back and gave him one last truth. She didn't regret a single second of them. And neither should he. Vito said nothing. But his eyes changed. Over the next few days, they lived on stolen glances and secret messages. Using accounts Gail had quietly helped Vito set up for secure business and far more dangerous confessions. Bernardo, however, had started noticing. He questioned Claire about why she had been acting strange. She blamed school and said she was tired. But Bernardo's instincts were sharper than that. They were walking on thin ice. Then Friday came. Claire left her university and spotted a black sedan idling near the exit. Something about it was wrong, and the story took a hard turn. Claire's survival instincts kicked in. She pulled out her phone, walked faster toward her car, and called Bernardo, but it was too late. Two large men stepped out of the sedan and locked eyes on her. One said her name in a thick Italian accent that made her blood run cold. Claire didn't stop to talk. She ran, the men were fast. Their footsteps pounded behind her. And suddenly, one grabbed her so hard, her phone hit the pavement and shattered. She kicked, scratched, and fought like hell until a heavy hand clamped over her mouth. The man whispered that Dante Russo remembered what Bernardo and Vito had taken from him. Then out of nowhere, he was ripped away from her. Claire stumbled back and saw Vito standing there, all rage and violence, his eyes dark as he threw the first brutal punch. The second man tried to move, but Vito hadn't come alone. 3 of his guards appeared and slammed the man against the hood of the car. Vito kept hitting the first attacker until Bernardo sprinted over and dragged him off. "He's already out," Bernardo shouted. But Vito was barely human in that moment. He only snapped back when he looked at Claire. The rage in his face collapsed into panic. He almost went to her, then stopped because Bernardo was right there. He asked if she was okay, his voice rough and shaken. Claire nodded, trembling. Bernardo looked between his sister and his top enforcer, demanding to know how Vito had gotten there so fast. Vito gave the weakest lie possible, claiming he was nearby. No one believed it. He had clearly put secret security on her weeks ago. Bernardo started putting the pieces together. He saw the way his most dangerous man looked at his sister, like she mattered more than anything else in the world. The realization was forming right in front of him, before he could start demanding answers. Police sirens wailed in the distance, forcing them to clean up the mess Dante Russo had sent to New York. Later that night, Claire was safely home when Rebecca said what neither of them had been brave enough to say. "He loves you," Claire admitted she knew, and that she loved him too. Rebecca took her hand and warned her that Bernardo would figure it out soon. He had seen the desperation in Vito's eyes, and Bernardo was not the kind of man who ignored what he saw. Claire was drowning in the pressure of the secret. She told Rebecca they had tried to stop, but they were too far gone. Rebecca hugged her and gave her the truth. When this came out, it was going to be ugly. Later, Claire lay in bed staring at her phone. Vito had sent 5 messages asking if she was safe and whether he should come over. They were sitting on a ticking bomb by Tuesday night. The warning signs were everywhere. The mansion was too quiet. The usual guards were gone. Vito texted that Bernardo was busy at the docks. Any sensible person would have seen the trap. Claire was so desperate for time alone with Vito that she ignored every instinct she had and walked straight into it. She found Vito waiting in his private office, and his hard expression softened the moment he saw her. He gave her a rare smile that melted every bit of caution she had left. As soon as the door clicked shut, he pulled her close by the waist and rested his forehead against hers. He told her he knew their situation was a disaster, but what they had was real. Claire's eyes filled, and she kissed him with everything she had been holding back. They were so wrapped up in each other that neither of them heard the footsteps in the hall. They didn't hear the office door open. Then Bernardo's voice cut through the room, demanding to know what they were doing. Claire tore herself away in panic. Her brother stood in the doorway, radiating betrayal and a rage cold enough to freeze the air. Vito tried to calm the situation at once. He stepped forward with his hands raised, trying to talk his boss down. Bernardo wasn't listening. He shouted so loudly the walls seemed to shake, cutting off every excuse before it could form. He stormed into the room, and for the first time, Claire saw real panic in Vito's eyes. Bernardo went straight for the wound, accusing him of breaking the sacred code. Vito tried to explain, but all his usual authority had vanished. Bernardo pointed at him, furious over the betrayal. His right-hand man, his closest ally, had been sneaking around with his sister and breaking the family's trust. Claire tried to step in, her legs shaking, begging Bernardo to listen. He turned his fury on her and ordered her to be quiet. Bernardo paced like a trapped animal, shouting that this made him look weak to the underworld, to him. It looked like he couldn't even control his own enforcer around his family. Claire's fear finally turned into anger. She told him this wasn't about his reputation. It was about real feelings. Bernardo laughed in a way that scared her more than his shouting. He said feelings did not stop bullets, betrayals, or men like Dante Russo from using love as a weapon. Then Vito spoke quietly, firmly. He said they still mattered. The room went still. Bernardo stopped pacing and dared him to repeat it. Vito took a breath and chose Claire over the life he had built. He looked his boss in the eye and said he loved her more than anything. Then Bernardo's fist came out of nowhere. The punch drove Vito backward into the desk. Blood appeared at his mouth, but he didn't lift a hand to defend himself. He took it like he believed he deserved it. Claire screamed and tried to get between them, but Bernardo pushed her aside. Then he gave Vito the ultimatum. Choose the girl, or choose the empire they had spent 10 years building together. Claire begged him to stop, but Bernardo couldn't hear her anymore. Vito wiped the blood from his face, shattered, and asked Bernardo not to make him choose. Bernardo's answer was colder than any threat. They were not brothers anymore, he said, because brothers didn't betray each other. Then he demanded an answer. The silence in that room felt unbearable. Vito looked frozen, his dark eyes full of pain. Claire stepped forward and shouted that he didn't have to choose, because she chose him. She chose Vito. But Bernardo looked at her like he no longer recognized his own sister. His voice dropped into something colder than shouting. He called his private jet and ordered it ready for Rome in 3 hours. Claire panicked, but Bernardo had already decided. She was being sent to Italy, and he didn't say when she could come back. In his mind, distance was protection. To Claire, it felt like losing everything at once. Claire sobbed with rage, screaming that she was an adult, and he couldn't exile her against her will. Bernardo didn't move. He told her she could walk onto the plane or be dragged onto it. Vito finally broke out of his shock and begged Bernardo to stop. He offered to give up everything: money, Mafia ties, his whole life in New York, if it meant keeping Claire safe. But Bernardo felt too betrayed to hear him. Vito had been his most loyal man, the person he trusted above everyone. Now Bernardo wanted him trapped in New York, forced to remember what he had lost for breaking the code. Bernardo's anger was real, but so was his fear. He had seen love get people killed before, and he was terrified Claire would be next. Vito pulled Claire into a desperate hug and kept apologizing. Claire told him it wasn't his fault, even though both of them knew they had played with fire and finally been burned. Vito looked straight into her eyes and promised he would find her, even if he had to burn his empire down and run to Italy himself. Their kiss was full of tears and heartbreak before she was forced to pack. Chapter 5 begins with Claire's flight to Rome. She spent the whole morning begging Bernardo to change his mind, but he stood there like stone. Watching her put her life into bags, he looked cruel from the outside. Up close, Claire could see the fear under it, and somehow that made it hurt even more. At 6:30 in the morning, Claire was still trying to bargain for her life. She promised to end things with Vito if Bernardo would just let her stay. Bernardo grabbed her bags without looking at her, because he knew one look might break him. Then Florence stepped into the kitchen, furious. She blocked his path and reminded him that he was Claire's brother, not her father. Bernardo tried to claim he was the man of the family, but even his voice cracked. He said he was protecting them from themselves. Florence wasn't impressed. She told him protection was not supposed to feel like punishment, and Claire was not a prisoner he could move across the world whenever he got scared. Florence told Bernardo he wasn't protecting Claire. He was punishing her for falling in love. She reminded him of his late father, a serious mob boss with strict rules, who still believed that when power and money fell away, love and family were all that remained. Protection, she said, was not the same as ownership. Bernardo tried to argue, but he was losing ground. Florence told him that her own husband's family had hated her at first because she came from the wrong side of town. But the old Don had chosen her anyway, and those had been the best 20 years of his life. Bernardo stood there with Claire's bags in his hands, looking for an answer and finding none. Florence told him plainly that his version of protection was destroying his sister. Bernardo shut down, pulled his cold Mafia mask back into place, and walked out without another word. Then Rebecca came flying down the stairs, devastated from crying all night. She hugged Claire tightly and swore she would wear Bernardo down, even if it took years. Claire was too broken to believe her, but Rebecca's loyalty was the one steady thing in the room. Then came the silent flight. Bernardo's guards watched Claire like hawks, making sure she couldn't run at the airport. Claire kept waiting for Bernardo to call and stop it. He never did. The 9-hour flight was brutal. Claire cried quietly while Bernardo's men watched from the back rows. Before her phone was taken, she saw 7 missed calls from Vito and one final text. "I'll come get you, but promises feel fragile when an ocean is put between two people." Rome was beautiful, all cobblestones and golden sunsets, but Claire hated it. Every view only reminded her that she had been banished from the man she loved. Weeks stretched until they felt like years. Florence called every day with updates, but it did nothing for the emptiness. The apartment was elegant, expensive, and unbearable. It was not home. 3 weeks later, Rebecca called with news. Bernardo was miserable. He barely slept, barely ate, and spent too much time staring at a photo of Claire. Claire was bitter enough to say she hoped he suffered, but Rebecca pushed back. Bernardo wasn't only trying to protect her from Vito. He was trying to protect her from the life around him. He had been 15 when their father died after a deal with Dante Russo turned into an ambush, and he had watched their mother almost disappear from grief. He was terrified of history repeating itself. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it made the pain harder to hate. Meanwhile, Vito went completely silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. Claire sat in Rome, convinced Vito had chosen the Mafia over her. Then Gail dropped the truth. Vito wasn't ignoring her because he had moved on. He was living in his office, working himself into an ice-cold machine because he blamed himself for letting Bernardo send her away. Claire had a beautiful apartment in Italy and felt empty inside it. Luxury meant very little when every room reminded her that her real life had been taken away. 6 weeks into that lonely routine, Florence called, sounding unusually tense. "Honey," she said, "we need to talk about your brother." Florence told Claire that Vito and Bernardo had gotten into a brutal fight. Vito demanded to know when Claire could come home, and Bernardo said never. Vito threatened to fly to Rome himself. Bernardo told him that if he left, their partnership was over. Vito said he didn't care. He was willing to throw away the entire empire to get Claire back. Bernardo hit him again and threatened to keep Claire away forever. Claire was crushed by the damage they were doing to each other. In secret, she wrote Gail a letter to give to Vito, begging him not to ruin his life for her. She hated writing those words, but she hated the thought of becoming the reason he lost everything even more. A week later, Gail called Claire in secret. Vito had read her letter, torn it apart, and said she didn't get to make his choices for him. He was not giving up. Gail warned her that Vito was planning to break the syndicate apart, if that was what it took to rescue her. He was only waiting for the right moment, and Gail was still helping them through hidden accounts Bernardo's men had not found. But that moment never came. Months passed, Bernardo refused to bend, Vito buried his pain in work, and Claire slowly faded in Rome. Bernardo thought distance would keep her safe. All it did was turn love, loyalty, and family into 3 separate wounds. Trying to reach Bernardo was like talking to a wall. 90 days passed after Claire was forced onto that plane. Her life in Rome became painfully predictable. Wake up, drink coffee, attend Italian class, sleep, repeat. Worse, Bernardo had 2 guards watching her around the clock. They tried to stay discreet. But Claire knew they followed every move and reported back to New York. It was an invisible prison. She had comfort, money, and a view tourists would dream of. But none of it felt like freedom. Claire spent her days staring out the window, trapped and waiting for something to change. Then on day 94 it did. Claire was walking 5 minutes to buy bread. The same routine she had followed for weeks. It had become so ordinary that even her guards had relaxed. Then a stranger grabbed her arm. "Claire Esposito," he said, "you're coming with us." She turned and saw 2 suspicious men carrying serious weapons. Growing up in a mafia family meant she didn't freeze right away. She bluffed, warning them that her guards would tear them apart. The man only smiled and told her Dante had already pulled the guards away with a fake emergency. Claire tried to scream, but his hand clamped over her mouth. She understood then that this was not random. Someone had studied every step of her routine. The men dragged Claire into an alley. She kicked, bit, and fought with everything she had. But they shoved her into a black van. One leaned close and whispered, "Dante Russo sends his regards." She understood then. They were not only taking her as leverage, they were punishing Bernardo for the old ambush he survived, and Vito for dismantling their roots in New York. Just before they injected her, Claire realized the painful truth. Bernardo had been right about one thing. In a mafia war, she could be used as a bargaining chip. Back in New York, Bernardo and Vito were barely speaking, freezing each other out in every meeting. Then Bernardo's phone rang from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Bernardo answered, and the voice on the other end said, "We have your sister." It was Dante Russo himself, calm enough to be terrifying. He toyed with Bernardo, saying Claire was alive for now, then laughed when Bernardo threatened him. Across the office, Vito heard the change in Bernardo's voice, and his instincts went lethal. The demand was clear. Bernardo had 24 hours to fly to Rome alone, sign over 3 shipping corridors, and confess weakness in front of the Russo Council, or Claire would start losing fingers. When the call ended, Bernardo looked like he had seen a ghost. He turned slowly toward Vito, terror in his eyes. Every argument they had been holding on to suddenly felt small. Whatever bitterness stood between Bernardo and Vito disappeared the second Claire's name entered the room. Dante Russo, one of the worst mafia bosses in Italy, had taken her and given Bernardo 24 hours to show up in Rome. It was an obvious trap. Still, Vito shifted into action without hesitation. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He became frighteningly calm. He ordered Bernardo to lock down the guards while he contacted his own people underground. Bernardo stood there stunned, choking on fear while Vito moved with cold precision. Vito looked Bernardo in the eye and claimed he was only helping because Claire was his partner's sister. Nobody in that room believed him. He was helping because Claire was his world. Within 2 hours, the mansion became a war room. Gail arrived with the elite security team, spreading maps and intelligence across the table. Bernardo was unraveling, pacing until he nearly wore a path into the floor. Vito finally grabbed his arm and forced him into a chair. He ordered him to breathe, because falling apart would not save her. Bernardo exploded, shouting that Dante had taken his little sister, and demanding to know how Vito could be so calm. Vito's calm was almost unnatural, but underneath it was a rage sharp enough to cut. Bernardo suddenly asked how he knew so much about Dante Russo's operations in Rome. Vito admitted the truth without flinching. For 3 months, he had been tracking him. Ever since the first attack in New York, he had known Dante might try again. He had followed shell companies, dock payments, and every man tied to the old deal that killed Bernardo's father. Bernardo stared at him, realizing Vito had been guarding Claire from across the ocean the entire time. Vito told him he could ban him from seeing her, but he could not stop him from keeping her safe. Just then, Gail called out that he had found the hideout. The hideout was an abandoned warehouse connected to a fake medical import company. Dante used to move weapons through Rome. Vito became a commander in seconds, marking exits and assigning teams. The plan was dangerous. Bernardo would walk up to the front entrance as bait and keep Dante talking. On Vito's signal, the team would breach. Bernardo feared they might hurt Claire, but Vito shut the thought down. They would move so fast the enemy wouldn't have time to react. Bernardo argued that nothing with Dante Russo was simple. Vito replied that they would make it simple. Bernardo looked at the man, who had once been his best friend, and understood that Vito was risking everything, despite what had happened between them. Vito stopped the apology before it could start, and told him to focus on saving Claire. Calling the family was brutal. Florence nearly broke down. But Rebecca took the phone with a voice gone cold. She blamed Bernardo outright and warned him that if he didn't bring Claire home, she would never forgive him. The call ended, leaving Bernardo to drown in guilt. Vito stepped in and said the private jet was ready. When he saw Bernardo spiraling, he promised Claire would be fine. Bernardo looked at him, defeated, and said he couldn't possibly promise that. Vito held his stare and said he could. Because when it came to Claire, he did not fail. The flight to Rome was thick with silence. And Bernardo spent the whole trip staring into the dark. While Bernardo sat trapped in guilt, Vito worked. He spent the entire flight on his phone, coordinating with Italian fixers and confirming positions. Finally, Bernardo asked how he had built such a huge underground network in only 3 months. Vito's answer was simple and brutal. You could do it if you stopped sleeping. He admitted he had barely slept for 89 days, not since Claire was forced onto that plane. Every waking minute had gone into keeping her alive from across the ocean. Bernardo started to say that Vito really loved her, but the words caught in his throat. Vito only nodded and said he always had. Bernardo had just been too stubborn to see it. Bernardo quietly admitted he saw it now, but before they could make peace, Gail interrupted with a critical update. They landed in Rome at sunrise. A strange kind of beauty for the violence they were about to bring. 3 vans waited with heavily armed men. Vito moved with terrifying precision, checking every weapon. He reminded Bernardo of the plan. Walk in, stall Dante. Wait for the signal. Bernardo worried the Russos would spot the backup, but Vito said his men were ghosts. Bernardo tried to thank him, but Vito cut him off. Apologies could wait until Claire was safe. The drive to the warehouse was silent. Tension filled the van until the decaying building finally appeared ahead. The sight of the building made Bernardo sick. He muttered that his sister was trapped with animals. Vito promised that in 10 minutes she would be safe. For all their anger and history, Bernardo believed him. He knew Vito would trade his life for Claire without hesitation inside the warehouse. Claire woke with a pounding headache and the metallic taste of blood in her mouth. A dirty bulb swung above her. She blinked against the light and took in the concrete basement. Her hands were tied behind her back, and her ankles were bound to a rusted metal chair. She was trapped in the damp dark, alone with whatever game Dante had planned. Panic tried to swallow her, but Claire forced herself to breathe and remembered what Bernardo had taught her. Stay calm. Scan the room. Never let them see you break. 2 men smoked in the corner. A third cleaned a handgun with slow, careless confidence. When he saw her move, he smirked and called her a Mafia princess. He taunted her, saying Dante hoped her brother paid the price for stealing from the Russo family. Claire looked him straight in the eye and promised that Bernardo would hunt down every one of them. She didn't stutter. She didn't flinch. Her defiance made him furious, and he slapped her hard enough to snap her head back and leave stars bursting behind her eyes. One of the kidnappers leaned into Claire's face, but she refused to shrink. She spat blood at his shoes and told him he had just signed his own death sentence. He raised his hand to hit her again. Then Dante's voice came through a speaker above them, smooth and cruel, ordering them not to damage his prize too badly. A second later, an explosion shook the building. Concrete dust fell. Glass shattered. Gunfire erupted upstairs. The kidnappers panicked, grabbed their weapons, and ran for the stairs. Claire fought against the ropes until her wrists burned. The gunfire grew louder, mixed with shouts in English and Italian. Dante had planned a trap, but he had underestimated how far Vito Caruso would go for one woman. Heavy footsteps rushed down the stairs. Claire froze. praying it was rescue and not another nightmare. The man who stepped into the basement was not Bernardo. It was Vito, dressed in black, wearing a blood-smeared bulletproof vest and gripping a gun. He looked terrifying. Then his eyes found Claire, and his face changed. Relief hit first, then rage. He saw every bruise, and Claire could almost feel the moment his mind shifted from rescue to punishment. He crossed the room and dropped to his knees, pulling out a knife to cut her ropes. He didn't waste time with speeches. He just got to her. Vito's hands trembled as he cut her free. He looked at Claire like she was the only thing in the room, asking if she was hurt. Her voice cracked when she answered, betraying how terrified she had been. The second the ropes fell away, his hands moved over her face, checking every mark. When he saw the bruise forming, something dangerous settled in his eyes. They had put their hands on her, and he had already decided what that meant. Claire broke down then, sobbing now that the worst seemed to be over. She had stayed strong for the kidnappers. She did not have to stay strong for him. Vito pulled her into a hug so tight, it felt like he was trying to keep her from ever being taken again. He buried his face in her hair and swore she would never leave his side. He said he didn't care about the code, the rules, or her brother. Nothing mattered more than her safety. Their kiss was desperate, born from fear and survival. Then one of his men ran downstairs, shouting that Dante was running and the police were coming. Vito scooped Claire into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her up the stairs. She clung to him, too shaken to argue, while the warehouse burned behind them. The ground floor looked like a battlefield. Rival men lay across the floor, disarmed or worse. Bernardo stood in the middle of it, blood on his face, looking destroyed until he saw Claire alive. Tears filled his eyes, but when Claire winced and said her ribs might be broken, Vito's expression went cold enough to frighten even his own men. He asked about Dante. One of his people said Dante had escaped through a service tunnel with 2 guards. Vito's face did not change, but Claire felt his arms tighten around her. Bernardo heard the silence and finally understood the depth of what Vito had been holding back. The ride to the hospital blurred into flashing streetlights and panic. Bernardo drove the SUV like he was racing death itself, shouting into his phone for the emergency room to be ready. Vito held Claire the entire time, stroking her hair and whispering that she was safe. When they arrived, the medical team was waiting. Nurses tried to make Vito stay outside, but he pushed past them with a look that ended the argument before it began. He said he was staying, and with blood still on his gear. No one dared tell him otherwise. Claire heard his voice beside her and held on to it. Claire lay battered on the hospital bed, and every time she winced, Vito looked like he might tear the room apart. The doctor mentioned broken ribs and stitches, then made the mistake of calling her lucky. Vito snapped that being kidnapped was not luck. It was his failure. He stayed close, watching the medical staff with the kind of stare that made everyone move carefully. When Claire finally rested under pain medication, Vito sat beside her and laced his fingers through hers. The contrast was almost unbearable. A man feared by half the city, holding her like she might disappear if he loosened his grip. Vito leaned close and said that anyone who came for Claire came for him. Using her as a pawn meant war with Vito Caruso. Claire tried to argue, but he gently quieted her and said he protected what was his with everything he had. Then the door opened and Bernardo stepped in, cleaned of the blood from the warehouse. Seeing Vito holding his sister's hand stopped him cold. For once he didn't explode. He looked tired, ashamed and older than he had that morning. He asked if he could talk to her. Vito said he would get coffee, but before leaving, he kissed Claire's forehead and told her to call if she needed him. Then he stepped out, leaving Bernardo to face what he had done. Bernardo sat beside Claire, and tears ran down the face of the man who had always tried to look unbreakable. He seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. Guilt had hollowed him out. He apologized for sending her away and for letting pride blind him. Claire tried to comfort him, but Bernardo refused to let himself off that easily. He admitted he thought taking her away from the Mafia world would keep her safe, but all he had done was put her directly in Dante Russo's reach. He had acted out of fear, then dressed it up as authority. His pride had hurt the very person he wanted to protect. If he had let her stay with Vito in New York, she would have been untouchable. Bernardo admitted that his stupid code had mattered more to him than his sister's happiness. Then he told her what had happened during the rescue. Dante had made the fatal mistake of using Claire as a human shield on the monitors, forcing Vito to see her bruised and tied up before the breach began. Bernardo's eyes went distant as he described Vito losing control. In 10 years. He had never seen anything like it. Vito took down 3 armed men in less than 30 seconds with his bare hands. After that, he went for the basement like nothing else in the world existed. Claire stayed silent, shaken by the depth of the devotion she had only partly understood. Bernardo sounded shaken too, as if the rescue had forced him to see the truth he had been avoiding. That was when Bernardo finally understood. Vito hadn't fought like that for the Brotherhood or the family business. He had done it because Claire was his world. She mattered more to him than the mob, the code, or his own life. Bernardo rubbed his face and confessed that he had spent months seeing Vito as the man who betrayed him, when the truth was harder. Vito had been the one man willing to protect Claire at any cost. Right then, Vito walked back in and sensed the weight in the room. He started to leave, but Bernardo stopped him. The silence stretched. Bernardo looked his best friend in the eye, and asked if he truly loved her. Vito didn't hesitate, he said, more than my life. Vito swore he would love Claire until his last breath. Bernardo reached out his hand. He asked for forgiveness for being stubborn, cruel, and for tearing them apart. Vito studied his face, looking for a trap, but found only regret and exhaustion. They shook hands. Bernardo admitted that Claire had never been his property to control. She had made her choice, and he had been too afraid to respect it. Then came the awkward embrace of 2 killers who had no idea what to do with their feelings. When they pulled apart, Bernardo gave Vito a sad smile and let go. Claire was his now, he said, and Vito's job was to protect her and keep her happy. It was not an easy blessing. It was one Bernardo had to bleed his pride dry to give. Bernardo apologized to Claire for almost getting her killed because of his ego, through her tears. Claire called him an idiot. But her idiot. He laughed, wiped his eyes, and left them alone. The moment the door shut, Vito was back at her side. He took her hand and kissed each finger like she was something sacred. He asked if she had heard his confession. Claire smiled and teased him about the part where he said she was his. But the teasing faded quickly. She pulled him close and whispered that she had always been his, even when they were apart. Vito kissed her softly this time. Not like a mobster claiming something, but like a man holding the person he had almost lost. Vito rested his forehead against hers and made his vow. She was coming back to New York, staying in his house, and remaining where he could keep her safe. Claire smiled through the pain and agreed. After 3 months of hell, she finally felt like she was going home. 3 days later, the doctors cleared her to leave and handed over a long list of recovery instructions. Vito took notes in a small notebook with the seriousness of a student before an exam. Claire tried to insist she could walk, but he ignored her completely. He lifted her gently into his arms and carried her to the wheelchair, careful with every movement. Claire was officially under his protection, and he had no intention of doing it halfway. Vito pushed her wheelchair down the hallway himself, shutting down every protest before she could finish it. He told her she would be staying in his room at the mansion, so he could oversee her recovery personally. When Claire tried to argue that she was a grown woman, Vito crouched to her level and let her see how shaken he still was. He asked her to give him this bit of control after nearly losing her. How could she say no to that? They headed for his private jet, where Gail waited, visibly relieved. He told them Rebecca was losing her mind back in New York. Claire tried to smile, but the thought of seeing her family again made her throat tighten. On the private jet, Gail told Claire that Florence was sick with worry, and Rebecca was already planning a welcome party, even though Bernardo had banned it 3 times. During the flight, Claire stayed close to Vito, sleeping on the sofa while he worked on his laptop with one hand and stroked her hair with the other. Every time she woke, his eyes were open, watching her. She told him to sleep, but he seemed to be running on espresso and fear, the same fear that had kept him awake for most of the 90 days she was gone. Claire finally reached for his hand and pulled it to her chest, letting him feel that she was still there. They landed in New York late at night. An armored SUV took them straight to the Caruso mansion, which glowed with lights. The moment the doors opened, Florence ran down the stairs with Rebecca right behind her. Florence pulled Claire into a fierce hug, then panicked when Claire groaned from the pain in her ribs. Rebecca stepped in next, crying openly as she hugged her as gently as she could. She sobbed that she thought she had lost her best friend forever. Claire tried to joke, but nobody laughed. The fear had been too real, and everyone in that room was still carrying it. Then Vito stepped forward, calm and commanding. He wrapped an arm around Claire's waist and told everyone she needed rest. He announced that she would be staying in his master bedroom. No hesitation. Florence could have objected, but she only looked at the way Vito guarded her daughter and nodded. That was answer enough. He carried Claire upstairs to the large, dark bedroom and tucked her into the king-size bed with surprising tenderness. Then he sat beside her and stared until she asked what was on his mind. He said he kept seeing the ropes on her wrists, and the confession made the room go quiet. The Mafia world never really slept. And neither, apparently, did Vito. He was running on fumes. He whispered that it still didn't feel real to have her back safe. Claire pulled him close, careful of her injuries, and promised she wasn't going anywhere. For the first time since she had been taken, his body seemed to let go of the tension. The strength left his shoulders. Claire told him to sleep, and he buried his face in her hair, like she was the only thing holding him together. The next morning, she woke to sunlight and coffee. Vito was in the bathroom, speaking quickly in Italian on the phone, testing her pain. She pushed herself up to find him. She caught his reflection in the mirror. He wore only sweatpants, his scarred chest bare, every mark familiar to her now, the second he saw her. He ended the call and rushed to her side, scolding her for not asking for help. She said she was fine, but let him guide her back to bed anyway. The morning passed in a haze of medicine, careful movements, and Vito refusing to leave her side as if enemies might drop through the ceiling. That afternoon, Florence knocked and came in with homemade tea and cookies, asking Vito with a gentle smile if she could have a minute alone with her daughter. Vito looked to Claire first, making sure she was comfortable with it. Then he kissed her forehead and stepped out without argument. Florence sat on the bed and handed Claire the tea she used to love as a child. For a while they sat in a heavy but peaceful silence. Then Florence said Claire's father would have loved Vito. At first he would have been furious, just like Bernardo, throwing around the code and trying to separate them. But Florence stopped Claire before she could respond. When Florence married into the mob, everyone warned her. Her family begged her to run from the danger. She knew the risks and stayed anyway, because loving him had felt worth the fear. Florence's eyes filled as she spoke about her 10th wedding anniversary. Claire's father, the feared Don, had told her his best memories were not victories over rivals or money stacked in safes. They were quiet Sunday mornings, drinking coffee and watching their children grow. Claire admitted she missed him terribly. Florence wiped a tear and said she never regretted the sleepless nights or the fear that came with loving him. She told Claire that rules had their place, but they were never meant to replace the heart completely. Florence said she saw that same fierce, world-moving love in Vito's eyes. It was the kind of loyalty that made a man fight armies. Then she told her daughter not to let fear choose her future. Florence said Claire's father had only ever wanted his little girl to be happy, and Vito had brought back a smile she had not seen in years. Then Claire told her the news. Bernardo had given them his blessing. Florence looked so relieved that she cursed under her breath, thanking God that stubborn boy had finally pulled his head out of his own pride. They both burst out laughing, and the sound eased something in the room. Then Vito walked back in, proving he had been standing guard just outside the door. He smiled when he realized he officially had Florence's approval. Now he only had to survive Rebecca. Right on cue. Rebecca burst through the door with Gail trailing behind her. Rebecca bounced onto the bed with all the chaotic energy Claire had missed. She grabbed Claire's and Vito's hands and pressed them together, practically shouting that she could finally support them openly, without Bernardo glaring at her. Claire tried to interrupt, but Rebecca was on a roll. She admitted she had seen their first secret kiss in the library months ago, and had been forced to keep quiet. Now she wanted marriage, babies, and full permission to spoil them rotten. Vito and Claire were speechless, while Gail laughed from the corner. Then Rebecca turned to Gail and announced that once she turned 18, they were happening. Gail blushed and reminded her she still had months to go. The scene was almost too much, a fearless teenager ordering a young mobster to admit his feelings, while Gail looked at Vito like he needed rescuing. Vito only laughed and told them to talk when Rebecca was 18. Later, when the house finally went quiet, it was just Vito and Claire in the dark. He pulled her close and told her that the next day, he would make it official with the crime families. She would be the new Donna. Anyone who challenged her would answer to him. Claire could hardly process the weight of it. Vito was not hiding her anymore. He was placing her at the center of his world, and that meant love was about to become politics. Vito wasn't rushing the ring yet, though he had already bought one and locked it in his private safe 3 carats, perfect cut, $180,000, chosen while Claire was still in Rome, because he had never truly accepted losing her. He told her to focus on healing first, and promised that once she was better, he would give her a proposal worthy of everything they had survived. 2 weeks later, Claire could finally breathe without sharp pain in her ribs. V called her into his office with a face gone cold and slid a thick folder across the desk. Dante Russo had been found. Every person involved in her kidnapping had been eliminated or stripped of power, but Dante himself was being brought back alive. Vito wanted Claire to know the threat was truly over. Vito had left nothing standing. In the 2 weeks after Claire's rescue, 23 Russo-linked men had been removed from the board. And the message to the East Coast underworld was clear. Nobody touched the Caruso family. Dante was delivered to a secure basement beneath the mansion. Beaten, furious, and finally afraid. Claire refused to go down there. She didn't need to see him. She only needed to know he would never reach her again. Vito held her. And for the first time, the future felt possible. Then wedding planning took over the mansion like a storm. Rebecca became an unstoppable event planner, covering tables with magazines, fabric samples, and notes. Florence tried to calm her down, but Rebecca refused. Claire had spent 3 months in exile, been kidnapped, and nearly died. This wedding, Rebecca declared, would be perfect. Rebecca reminded everyone that after everything Claire had survived, the wedding had to be flawless. Vito walked in, took one look at the chaos of decorations and planning boards, and wisely turned right back around with a grin. But before any vows could be spoken, the old families demanded a council meeting. Some of them respected Vito's power, but they did not like the idea of Claire becoming Donna after so much blood had been spilled in her name. On Thursday, Bernardo came into the office looking uncertain and asked Vito who he had chosen as his best man. Vito looked at him like the answer should have been obvious. It was him. Blood or not, they were brothers, and if the council wanted to test Claire, they would face both of them. The council gathered that night in the Caruso dining hall, all dark suits, cold eyes, and quiet judgment. One old capo asked if Claire understood what kind of life she was marrying into. Before Vito could answer for her, Claire spoke for herself. She said she had been born into that world, exiled by it, kidnapped because of it, and still chose Vito with open eyes. Then Bernardo opened the doors and had Dante Russo dragged in, bruised and silent, as proof of what happened to men who touched his sister. The room went still. Bernardo told them Claire was not a weakness. She was family, and anyone who treated her as leverage would become the next lesson. Vito did not smile, but his pride was written all over his face. After that, nobody objected again. With the council silenced, the wedding preparations finally felt real. Vito sat at his desk, tense over his vows like a nervous schoolboy, instead of a man who commanded killers. Gail, only 19 but apparently the sensible one, told him to stop trying to sound like a poet and write the truth. So Vito wrote that Claire had pulled him back from the edge of the grave. A week later, the Caruso and Esposito families gathered at the same table, without anyone reaching for a weapon. Bernardo raised his glass to the couple and admitted he had been an overprotective idiot. After so much violence and pride, peace felt almost impossible. Somehow they had earned it. The wedding day arrived under a clear New York sky. Claire sat in a guest room at the Caruso mansion, nervous while everyone helped her get ready. Florence pinned the veil into her hair and whispered that all the Mafia madness was just background noise now. Rebecca tried not to ruin her makeup while taking far too many pictures and telling Claire how beautiful she looked. Claire caught herself staring at the doorway, half expecting another crisis to interrupt them, but this time, no guards ran in. No phone rang with bad news. When they stepped into the backyard, it looked like something from a dark fairy tale softened by white flowers. At the start of the aisle stood Bernardo in a black suit. No matter how much had happened, he was there. The moment Bernardo saw his sister, his tough expression broke. He fought back tears and told her their father would have been proud. They linked arms and walked down the aisle together. At the altar, Vito stood beside Gail in a black suit, looking powerful and completely undone by the sight of Claire. The way he looked at her held nothing back. Bernardo handed her over and quietly warned Vito to take care of her. Vito swore on his life that he would. Then Bernardo leaned closer and added that if the old families ever tested her again, they would answer to both of them. Vito nodded, and Claire knew the blessing was real this time. Then came the vows. Vito unfolded his paper with shaking hands and told everyone that Claire had broken every rule he ever lived by. He had traded his cold empire for her love, and he did not regret it. Claire gave her vows next. She admitted she had always known Vito was dangerous, but the real danger had been realizing she could not live without him. When the officiant pronounced them married, their kiss felt like the ending they had almost not survived to reach. The reception began, but Claire had one more surprise. In the middle of the celebration, she took the microphone, tapped it once, and brought the room full of dangerous men to complete silence. She looked at Vito and announced that she was pregnant. For 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then Vito lost all composure, lifting Claire carefully and laughing through shock as both families erupted around them. Rebecca had secretly turned part of the reception into a baby celebration after learning the news the day before. She appeared with a huge black balloon for the reveal. Vito and Claire popped it, and blue confetti burst across the room. They were having a boy. Vito froze, overwhelmed, then pulled Claire close and whispered that they were having a son. Florence cried, saying Claire's father would have been proud of the peace they had built. Bernardo ran around shouting that he was going to be an uncle for one night. The guns, grudges, and old rules faded into the background, and the family simply celebrated. Rebecca couldn't resist teasing Gail, hinting that they might be next. And he actually blushed because the promise ring hidden in his drawer suddenly felt a lot less secret. As the chaos settled, Vito and Claire stepped away from the music for one quiet minute. He noticed the healing marks on her wrists and touched them so gently it made her chest ache. He whispered that their son would never inherit their fear, only their strength. Claire leaned into him and believed it too. And there were still little truths behind the scenes. Claire had worn black dresses because she knew they drove Vito crazy. Florence had known more than she admitted, but chose to let fate move on its own. Vito had been lost from the start. Behind closed doors, Bernardo had nearly caught them kissing 4 separate times. Gail had helped them communicate through secret accounts, long before anyone realized. Claire had downplayed her broken ribs, so Vito wouldn't turn the hospital into a war room. Vito had put elite protection on her 2 weeks after their first kiss, and that decision saved her life outside the university. Even the engagement ring had been waiting, before Claire knew there would be a proposal. None of those details made it into the family speeches, but they were part of the truth. Love had not made their world softer. It had made them fight harder for the people who mattered. There were even more details that made the story feel unreal. Florence once compared an old photo of her late husband to Vito, and noticed the same obsessed look in their eyes. Vito had said his first "I love you" in Italian back in chapter 3, too afraid to say it plainly in English. Claire knew she was pregnant 3 days before the wedding, but saved the news for the perfect moment. Gail had already bought a promise ring for Rebecca, quietly playing the long game. And Dante Russo, the man who thought Claire would break Bernardo and Vito apart, became the reason they stood together in front of every family that mattered. In their world, loyalty was not just something people claimed. It was something they proved, protected, and defended at any cost. Claire and Vito's story is not only a romance filled with danger, passion, and family conflict at its heart. It is a story about personal freedom and the courage to choose love even when society, family, and tradition stand in the way. Claire is not a passive character. She knows what she feels, understands the risks, and still chooses honestly. This makes her journey meaningful because she refuses to let others decide her life for her. Bernardo's reaction shows a common human mistake, confusing control with protection. He believes he is saving Claire by separating her from Vito and sending her away to Rome, in his mind. He is defending family honor and keeping his sister safe, but his decision only brings pain, loneliness, and eventually greater danger. This teaches an important educational lesson. Protecting someone should not mean taking away their voice. Vito also has an important lesson to learn. At first, he hides behind rules, codes, and loyalty to Bernardo. He believes that loving Claire is a betrayal. But over time, he realizes that true love requires courage, not secrecy. When Claire is kidnapped, Vito's actions prove what his words already suggested. She is not a temptation or a mistake. She is the person he is willing to fight for. The story also shows that love becomes meaningful when it is chosen freely. Claire chooses Vito. Vito chooses Claire. Eventually, even Bernardo learns that Claire was never his possession to control. She is her own person first. For viewers, this story teaches that family love must include respect. Real protection gives people strength, not imprisonment. Love may challenge rules, but when it is honest, loyal, and responsible, it can heal wounds and bring families back together.